Done. Go ahead and start.
Okay, great. So most of you know me. I'm Jeff Pummill. I'm one of the staff for the Exceed Champions. We've done things like this in the past, but we're trying to get a new trend started where we have some of these tech talks, and we do have kind of a large installed base of topics that we are looking at right now. But it turns out these software development or deployment tools came up recently on the Campus Champions mailing list. So if someone was doing a new cluster install and they were asking about Slack and EasyBuild, or I'm sorry, Spack and EasyBuild. So we thought since we knew some people in the community that were pretty good with these tools, or really good actually, we'd present this to the group. And with 38 participants now, it looks like it's a pretty timely topic. Slack I'm stuck on Slack. Apologies, it's down today or something. They've had some issues, so now I'm thinking Slack instead of Spack. Backing up, EasyBuild and Spack are software deployment host tools. They're used to build software from scratch and do a host of other things in the process. Some of the larger labs have started using these. In fact, I think in one of the emails I mentioned that some of the places where these are being used as of late. EasyBuild, for example, has got now 1,500 what I call recipes for building all types of software packages in the open source community, and it makes it an ideal tool for deploying a lot of these things if you are building from scratch. We have for our panel today Cormac Garvey from Idaho National Labs, Jared Baker from University of Wyoming, and Chris Stackpole from unnamed at the moment. We probably all know Chris, but we'll avoid naming his affiliation right now because of political rules. But these are people that have been at various degrees of participation in using these build tools. Others have experience with one or the other. But I think we're going to go ahead and start off with Cormac Garvey from INL. I know Cormac's been using EasyBuild for a long time on the systems at INL, and I think as of late he's been looking closely at Spack. And so we'll give Cormac kind of the opening lines. These are his presentation slides that you can see right now. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Cormac.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Cormac Garvey. I work as a HPC software consultant at Idaho National Laboratories. So we have been using EasyBuild for the last couple of years. So I would like to share with you our experiences with using the EasyBuild framework for deploying software on our main clusters. I'm going to point out what we find good about it and what we don't find so good about it. But also, we're also looking to the future and looking at other deployment frameworks. And so one of the other ones that we are considering is Spack. And I will share with you the reasons why we are considering using Spack in the future. So before I kind of get into the details of EasyBuild and Spack, I'd just like to talk a little bit about, let's see, get the next slide. I talk a little bit about the actual architecture that we're deploying the software on. So our main cluster in the INL is an SGI ICE-X. It is just under 35,000 Intel Broadwell cores. It is connected with an InfiniBand FDR, and the topology is an enhanced hypercube. We are currently running a SLES 11 SP4, and this particular architecture has a LinPack performance of just over a petaflop. Our storage, our home directories are on EMC Isilon, and our Scratch, we use our parallel file system, we use Panasys. So in the INL, we have a total of maybe about 400 to 450 users. 50% of our users are actually external. So we have users, as you can see in this map, around the United States. We have people from industry, people from other labs and universities. And you can see there's a concentration in the state of Idaho. That's where we are located. We also have some users located outside the United States. some in Europe and some in Asia. So INL is actually the lead lab in nuclear energy, and some of the key applications that we run on our systems are export control software, things that would do radiation transport, fuel performance calculations, burn-up calculations. So they're the sort of export control software that we would run. We also run, as you can see from this graph here, a lot of chemistry codes, VASP, LAMPS. So we have a wide range of applications that we need to put on our systems to support our users. So just a little bit of background how we got to this point of using EasyBuild. Like a lot of people, we used to install software manually. And if you install software manually, it's prone to errors. It's prone, people tend to install the software differently. The actual knowledge of installing the software, it's not in a central location. So there are problems installing software manually. So we started looking at trying to automate this process, and there's two approaches to take in doing that. One is to develop our own framework or see what is out there, what frameworks are out there to automate the deployment of software. So when we looked at this, EasyBuild really was sort of, had been out for maybe a year or two. It seemed to satisfy all our needs. It's well documented. It's very easy to install on your systems, and there's a number of different ways of doing that. It is based on Python, so it's very flexible and it can be expanded for any custom installations. It has a lot of flexibility in regards to integrating with your module environment, whether it's Tickle or C-based modules, or in our case, we use the LMOD. There's a lot of automation in these deployment systems, automation in downloading the software, generating the module files. EasyBuild also has a capability of installing some commercial software. So we have Abacus, Star CCM, MATLAB, and the Intel compiler suites that we use EasyBuild to install. And what this gives us is a central location for this knowledge of how we install software. So, for example, if myself or one of my colleagues install software, it's easy for someone else to kind of go back and look and see how that software was installed. I think the Spack and EasyBuild, for that matter, they're very active communities. I think I've found that if I have any questions, any issues in using EasyBuild, the community is very responsive. So as I say, like a lot of these advantages with EasyBuild, they also really exist with Spack, and so there's not really a big advantage there from the list that I have on this particular slide. So now I'd like on this particular slide to talk a little bit about the specific structure of software in our environment. We like to install software in specific locations depending on the type of software that we are dealing with. So, for example, in this chart, we can see in Apps Local, everything in Apps Local would be software that would be classified as available for everyone who has a HPC account. So that may be open source software, it may be licensed commercial software, but everyone can have access to that software. The other category of software, it's the EXP_CTL, which is export control software. So all of the software that is export controlled would be installed in that location. And so users who want to access that software would need to get permission to have the privilege of using that software. Everything that we put in the restricted location is restricted software, but it is software that isn't export controlled. And typically software that we would put there would be maybe software that a particular group has purchased. So there are some limitations there. And all of the other software goes into projects. So in each of these structures, we have an EasyBuild location, and a Spack location, and another. So obviously all of the EasyBuild software is under the EasyBuild location. The Spack software is under the Spack directory, and everything else that is built outside these two frameworks would be in other. So for those who are not familiar at all with EasyBuild, like this is just kind of a very high level description of the architecture. As I mentioned, it is based on Python, so Python 2.6 or greater is required. On top of that, you would have the EasyBuild framework. This is the part where users would typically not touch or modify. And then just above the EasyBuild framework, we have the Easy Blocks. So this is the actual sort of recipe that describes how the software is to be installed. There are a number of generic easy blocks. For example, if you are installing software which is installed with, for example, a configure, a make, and make install, there's generic easy blocks to deal with that. And the same with if you were installing software that required CMake, generic for that. But if you had a customized build, you may have a specific easy block which describes how you want that software to be installed. And then above the easy blocks, there are easy configs. So an easy config would refer to which easy block you want to use to install the software. And then after that, it would contain maybe the name of the software, the version, where the software can be deployed, and things like that. We'll see an example of that in a second. And then we have the tool chains. In its simplest form, a tool chain may be just a compiler. It may be a number of different packages, like it may contain a compiler, an MPI library, and, for example, a tune blast library, etc. So once you have a number of tool chains, and then you would pick which tool chain you want to install your software. So that's a basic outline of the EasyBuild architecture. So in this next slide, we have a very simple easy config file. And so at the very top, we see that we have the line easy block is equal to config make. So this is actually pointing to a generic easy block. So this particular software is typically installed with a config, a make, and make install. And so basically in this file, we just define the name of the software, the version of the software, the tool chain, the actual tool chain we want to use to install the software. And then the tool chain options are basically abstracting out the compiler options. So these options work for every tool chain. We have some information that would go into the generated module file. And towards the bottom, we have some information indicating where this particular software, the actual source code, is located. And that software. So the next slide kind of highlights how we upgrade our EasyBuild environment here in INL. So under the EasyBuild directory, we have a number of different versions of EasyBuild, but also we have some customizations that we do. So we have some specific modifications outside the core EasyBuild, easy config files, or easy blocks, our tools, some modifications that we've made. We will put them under the INL EasyBuild directory. And then on the same level, there's the sources directory. This is the repository where we keep all of the actual source tarballs. So if I'm installing software, it would see if it's in that location first. If it's not, then it would go out to the internet, grab the software, install it, and then deposit it in the sources directory. So the next slide shows what sort of a default, how the modules would look from a default EasyBuild installation. So in our case, we don't use hierarchical modules. We use just the flat modules. And so the structure here is, you can see the modules, there's different categories. There's the MPI category, there's some numerical libraries, there's compilers. So all of the software has, by default, this naming convention. It has the name of the software, / the next number is the version of that software, and then it's followed by the actual tool chain that is used to build the software. Now, I will note in EasyBuild, there is ways to customize the look of particular module files. If you don't like this naming convention, there's ways to customize that. So let's see. So we've used EasyBuild for a while. So let's just kind of go through what I feel are the pros and cons of EasyBuild. The first point I'd like to make here in regards to the pros, that we've been using this for a number of years in a production environment. installing, when we take into account all the combinations of MPI and the compilers that we have, thousands of packages, and they perform very well. So this works very well in our production environment. Obviously, with the reason you would go with an automated building environment, it gives you that automation. And so EasyBuild does a nice job of automating that process and speeding up that workflow of installing software. And I don't think we've come across any software that a user has requested that we could not install with EasyBuild. If there's it's usually just, and if you're familiar with Python, it's not too difficult to write a config file or an easy block to install a new software. I think EasyBuild, another big pro for EasyBuild, I think it's well tested. I mean, if you use the tool chains that they specify, I think everything, it works quite well and is well tested. In regards to logging, I think they do a good job there. So if I need to go back, if I have a failure in installing software, they provide good logging data for me to go back and figure out what went wrong. And also, if later on I need to go back and understand how a particular software was installed, there's kind of very good logging. So all of that is great, but now we kind of get to the cons. Earlier on, in regards to our software structure here in INL, we like to install in different locations depending on the type of software that we're installing. And so EasyBuild and Spack, for that matter, really like to install in a single location. They don't really work well out of the box if you want to install in multiple locations. So, we had to work around that. But in EasyBuild, that's not a big deal, because basically all you really needed to do was specify with an environmental variable EasyBuild underbar prefix to where you were installing the software, install it there, and then leverage the capabilities of LMOD to present it to the users in a global manner. In regards to Spack, it's not as easy to do that in Spack. There is a workaround that if we go the Spack route, that how I can do that today. I know there is, this is an active sort of development area in the Spack community to how to stack multiple software stacks and present them as a global view. For people who are interested in that, there's maybe a couple of development branches where you can see that work, and that in its current state, that may work for you. Another sort of complaint I have with the EasyBuild is it tends to provide a little bit of a messy environment. Coming from a HPC environment, I think I like a sort of a minimalist environment. So what I mean by messy is that usually when you install software, you use a tool chain, and a tool chain may, as I mentioned, may contain a compiler, an MPI library, a BLAST library, Scala pack, and FFTs. And so when you build with that particular tool chain, it'll bring in some other libraries into your environment that you're not really using, and it kind of gives that cluttered look. And also, for example, for people installing Python, because you will have multiple tool chains in your environment, you will probably need to install multiple versions of Python for each of those tool chains. So it kind of has that cluttered look a little bit. I think the EasyBuild community has sort of addressed that by using this EasyBuild underbar minimum, and it has a dependency to have been built with the same tool chain. It can be built with a subset of that tool chain. And also there's some capabilities within the LMOD and EasyBuild to hide modules, which reduces some of the clutter. Another sort of con that I have with EasyBuild, especially when I compare it with Spack, it's not as flexible in changing recipes. I think the only thing that I'm aware of that you can change on the fly if you have an existing config file is you can build the software swapping out a tool chain. Spack, as we'll see, has a lot more flexibility for and control over, how you install your software. So let's see. So as I mentioned, we've had success with EasyBuild. We've been using it for a couple of years, but we are considering Spack. And so the primary reasons we're considering Spack is the first one I mentioned here. It provides, in my opinion, a cleaner and safer environment. And the reason why I say that is from the get OR paths to indicate the location of dynamic libraries. And so with OR path, the actual path is static, it's fixed when you install the software. Unlike LD library path, you can on the fly dynamically change the location of your dependent shared libraries. And so I think that provides, because of that capability, your environment needs to load less modules in Spack compared to EasyBuild. And also the fact that it doesn't use tool chains, it's tidier. You're not loading libraries that you're not using. And I think from a user's perspective, in regards to it being safer, if you consider a Python environment, you can build Python with one, for example, version of GCC compiler and have that in your environment, and then load a different GCC compiler and build your the Python that's in your environment, because it's resolving its dynamic libraries through ORPAT, isn't affected by the other GCC that is in your environment. And I think that is a safer environment for users, and they're less likely to get their environment clobbered. The second reason why really considering Spack over EasyBuild is I think it provides more flexibility. And the reason for that is, from the get-go, all of the dependencies are resolved through directed acyclic graphs. And so in the Spack environment, it really has a good handle of all of the dependent software. So a simple thing like you install software with Spack, you can easily remove it. In EasyBuild, if you install some software, you have to manually go and delete the software. There is no Easy. What the directed is fine-grained control over how you want your software installed. If you want, for example, to use a different compiler, it's very easy to do that. If you want to use a different version of one of your dependencies, you can do that. There's a concept of variance. If you want to build with or without MPI, you can do that. So there's a lot of flexibility there. I think also in regards to compiler options, if you're building a particular application and you want to play around with different compiler options, I think Spack does a better job at doing that, and it resolves the differences in those two applications which are built with different compilers through a hash. In EasyBuild, you would differentiate between those two versions by kind of a kludgy way with the version suffix. So it would append something to the module file to indicate that difference. I think Spack is also nice if you have to install some software where there isn't an existing recipe. Using the Spack create, it creates a nice template and skeleton for you where you can just kind of get that software up and running very quickly by just writing a few lines of Python code. So just I think we're on my final slide here. So if someone came to me at this point and was considering using Spack or EasyBuild, I would point them in one of those two packages based on this. I think if a user wants something that is very mature, that is very stable, and they're okay following kind of a strict way of installing, at least a stricter way of installing the software, and they EasyBuild. And if they're willing to put up with a little extra clutter in their environment, I think EasyBuild out of the box, I think you will have a lot of success there. On the other hand, if a user wants more fine-grained control over how the software is installed and wants to provide a sort of more minimalist a cleaner, in my opinion, safer environment for the users, because under the hood, it Spack uses ORPAD, unlike EasyBuild that uses LD library pad. If that's the case, and you're willing to put up with, maybe a few failures, one of the things, all of that flexibility. Let me just kind of go back here. So Spack, the version of Spack right now is 0.11.2, I think is the current release version. I think they were planning maybe over 6 months ago to release a 1.0 version. So the 1.0 version, when you see a 1.0 version, they will have full integrated testing as part of that environment. So we've kind of been waiting for maybe 6 months for that to happen. So because it's not as thoroughly tested as EasyBuild, and because there is a lot of options to install your software, you may come across some failures building software with Spack. And so that's one thing to take into account. So in my case, I like to have a lot of control and flexibility in installing the software, so I may kind of lean in that direction. Actually, one other slide here. So having used EasyBuild for a while and played with Spack, there's a couple of things that have come to mind. For most people, when you decide, if you decide on one of these two deployment managers, I think it's worthwhile also having for that is just from a debugging, troubleshooting standpoint, I think it's useful. Like, I've come across cases where I've wanted to install software with Spack and it has failed, but it's installed quite straightforwardly okay with EasyBuild. And by just kind of checking to see what installation options EasyBuild use, it was very easy to kind of figure out how to get the Spack working very efficiently and quickly. So from a debugging standpoint, I think it's useful to have both of these packages around, even if you are planning one for production. Just a kind of a point on EasyBuild. When I started with EasyBuild, I had that tendency when I was deploying software to jump in and modify the easy block. I think you'll have more success if you do as much of the customization in the easy config file first, because that can accept a lot of Python code, and there's a lot of hooks to allow you to customize your software in that environment. So I would recommend spending time customizing the easy config file before going and modifying an easy block. Just a third point here regarding installing ISV software. As I mentioned, EasyBuild can do that, but I'm not sure, I've had a lot of problems installing Intel compilers and Abacus. Intel has a tendency to change the locations of where software is located, and it causes EasyBuild, for example, to have problems installing that software. And the same with Abacus. Abacus 2016, up to 2016, it installed software one way, and then from version 2016 on, it installed it differently. And I found that when I installed with these package managers, it would have been quicker to use just the provided ISV installer rather than troubleshooting the issue within the actual EasyBuild or Spack environment. A similar point with Python environments. Overall, I think the Spack environment does a better job of installing Python and provides a more integrated Python environment compared to EasyBuild. I like the fact that in Spack you can activate and deactivate modules on the fly, but still I think that pales in comparison to other environments out there for installing Python, like Conda and virtual env. In some sense, it may be better to leverage those and let those environments handle the Python and use the deployment managers for installing other software. So with that, I will stop here, and I'll turn it over to some of the other panelists to kind of give to share some of their experience on using these package managers.
Thanks for that, Cormac. That was very informative and very detailed. We did have one quick question from the attendees asking about OS dependencies. So I know very little about this, but I think for the most part you can use Spack or or EasyBuild on any up-to-date Linux distribution, although it probably works best on the SLES and the Red Hat stuff.
Yeah, like I think it works quite well. You know, even with an EasyBuild, if there is some dependent, you know, if it depends on some existing RPMs, you can put that in a config file. Yeah, so that's one of the areas that even if there is a given recipe and you're running on an OS that, for example, isn't tested, you may need to do some tweaking. But in general, I think they work quite well in any Linux distribution. That's from my experience.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Jared, you want to go next?
Yeah. So I'm from the University of Wyoming, and we are deployed with Spack on our new system. We have a couple different reasons why we chose Spack. We used to just build everything via shell scripts, and that got tiresome because we had admins that did things in various different ways and nothing was ever really consistent. So by using EasyBuild or Spack, we were kind of forced to go down, this is the way you install something with a provided prefix, and everything became more consistent. We were a big user of LMod somewhat from the beginning, and their hierarchical support. We had some bunch of tweaks to our LMod environment. So that we were really dependent on LMod. I guess I started looking at Spack and EasyBuild back at SC Austin a few years ago. I was much more interested in EasyBuild back then, and I've been hacking on it a little bit. There were little things that I just didn't like about it to actually force a deployment on our current system. And that's where I found out about Spack and started tinkering a little more with that, and actually enjoy using it more from time to time. The reasons that I kind of selected, I guess, Spack was we were a big user of the PGI compilers at a time, and EasyBuild, I mean, maybe within the last year, has just started really supporting PGI, and so we never really went down that route with EasyBuild. Spack, we can define any sort of compilers, including LLVM and the Clang environments. GCC is there, but one of the big things that I liked about Spack was the ability to short circuit the dependency graph. So if we have hardware provided like compilers or fixed MPI, it was very easy to insert those dependencies into the build process with Spack. Variants are a nice thing. So if you want to define debug builds or serial MPI builds, OpenMP capable builds or CUDA builds, that's very easy to do in Spack. There's this concept of virtual providers, which somewhat allow Spack to abstract standard APIs such as the BLOS-LAPACK. So whether you want to use like OpenBLOS or MKL, you can actually, say that I just need to depend on the math libraries, or I need something like that provides MPI standard, the standard 2 version. And then there's a list of packages, whether it's OpenMPI or MBAP-pitch, that provide those standards. And my favorite thing is the power of the spec and the way it does its concretization, and allowing us to select that DAG according to what our users really want that software package to be. One of the downfalls, or maybe not ready yet, is Spack is a little bit younger than EasyBuild. I mean, we're not even at 1.0 status yet, but there's a lot of work going into it. Even though we jumped on the Spack, this kind of leaves. I operate out of the development branch, mostly on GitHub, which often with software package that I throw into production, I really don't like to do that. But Spack's one of the ones that I've gotten comfortable enough with doing that. Concerns about environments, though, that Cormac's had with Python. Spack lets me handle that a little bit better. And I have the same concerns with other interpreted languages like R and Julia and Ruby and such. But But I guess to wrap up how we use SPAC on our system currently is that we have a specific system user that's designed for building production software. And we house it on a centralized file system, very much in the same way INL does their application layout. But the SPAC will generate an LMOD module file that we have, which is we've templated and customized in our own way that kind of matches how our systems looked before SPAC. So our users are very comfortable with that currently. Customized installation prefixes are very easy. SPACs, I think, got a little bit cleaner implementation as far as compartmentalizing how the CLI is laid out. I find it much more intuitive to install, uninstall, refresh the modules, create packages. EasyBuild has hundreds of options on the command line that some of them may need to be required to be matching or conflict with each other. So my personal preference is I enjoy the sub commands that they have rather than flagged options all the time. We've deployed all our software via SPAC. It's been super clean so far. I mean, we even do the Intel compilers with it, and it's worked for the most part. There are that we have to do, but when you need to edit package file with SPAC, it's just SPAC edit, and that allows us to do a lot of things. Some of the other things that I prefer over SPAC or over EasyBuild, I guess, is that there's these concept of different repos with namespaces. So I can define my own repos of packages that I can't necessarily submit upstream, but I can still get all the crowdsourcing effort that goes into building of SPAC packages. So that's one of my favorite things. One of the things that I really want to get into looking at is the SPAC views. I think that'll allow me to create sort of a toolchain environment, but I'm looking not necessarily to a toolchain environment for like compilers and MPI stacks, but I'd like to have it be more science domain like. So if I can have a specialized view for a certain set of bioinformatics group, or be able just to load a module that view could contain maybe special libraries that they require without them having this massive clutter of 20, 30 modules loaded all the time. So that's kind of my take on SPAC. I've really enjoyed working with it. I think the CLI is much cleaner than EasyBuild. I had EasyBuild going on our older system for a while as development goes, and there were just little things that kind of put me off continuously that I didn't want to ever actually implement over immediately to using it. So that's kind of where I sit in the SPAC area.
Okay, thanks, Jared. I want to remind everybody that I've got this call for an hour and a half, so we're going to have plenty of time for questions. I hope everybody's coming up with a bunch, but I think we're going to slide over and have Chris Stackpole give us his perspective. I think he's newer to the fold, and he's just starting to dig into some of these things at his deployment, and it'd be interesting to hear what his observations have been for that perspective. Chris?
Sure. Thank you very much. So I'm Chris Stackpole. I'm employed by the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So, nothing that I say is an endorsement of my employer or anything like that. So, lawyers, please don't hate me. And as Jeff mentioned, I am the kind of newbie to this. We've been doing mostly all of our scripts. We write a script per software package is kind of how we've been doing it. And then that script we've just used as we need to update a new package, we just rerun the script. So being kind of the newbie, I'm kind of worried that I'm the Dunning-Kruger effect here of the panel, but I am basically kind of providing that voice of somebody who's just trying to get started. I have used both Spack and EasyBuild. I spent about a week just tinkering with both of them before I started kind of moving down towards the EasyBuild path, but I have not actually made a final choice yet. I'm still in the build stage for the new cluster, and so I still have that time and flexibility to switch. And so, you know, I've been taking in a lot of what was said today and some of my notes so that I can kind of explore some of the features of both a little bit more. So just kind of start off, when you are installing either one of these and you're kind of going through the base documentation, you'll find that the base documentation is actually pretty good to kind of get you started. Here's the difference and the key, you know, hinge point here. I would be surprised if any admin on the call today has issues installing multiple versions of GCC and getting them to run in your environment. That is trivial. And all the documentation does a really good job of the trivial packages. It's the more complex packages that I've really struggled with both Spack and with EasyBuild. And so I'm going to pick on one, not for any love or hate of it, but just because it is one that encompasses the majority of the problems that I've had with both. MATLAB. We're all familiar with the MathWorks product. We may not all use it. I know quite a few people that I see on the list do, but it's one that we all kind of know. When I was just digging around in the Spack repositories, I do not see any information on how to utilize MATLAB. There's zero documentation that I can find. You can do a Spack info MATLAB, and that will give you the very little snippet of what it's supposed to do for 2016B, but it gives you no direction on how you're supposed to deal with a license key or an install key, how you're supposed to move it into the format. It asks that you have a targz file, but anybody who has installed MATLAB anytime recently, you know that you get 2 ISO files. You don't get a targz file. How am I supposed to go from an ISO file into a targz file? None of that information is in Spack for documentation, and I found that to be true for a lot of the more difficult, especially proprietary packages. And so that is a huge kind of issue for me when I'm trying to just get started and say, how do I install these packages that I need on my system if there's not even any documentation for it. EasyBuild, primarily the reason why I started going with EasyBuild is that the EasyBuild documentation was mostly a framework, but for the most part, it existed, at least in several of the packages that I'm working. Some of it was straight up wrong, but it was at least a start. And so, you know, you have this MATLAB software. It has 2 releases a year, and with it, I need to be able to install additional software packages with MATLAB alongside of it, like Dynair, right? I need to compile multiple versions of Dynair with MATLAB, so I would really like to be able to have this framework that I can say, how do I get from step A to step B? And so when you look at the EasyBuild, if you were to actually go out to the GitHub repo right now, you'll actually see that I spent a whole lot of time trying to take their documentation from a framework that really didn't work into a issue that's currently open that has the process, the build process. I have tested it multiple times, and I have people who have emailed me. In fact, I just got an email earlier this week from somebody saying, hey, that helped a lot. I was able to get MATLAB installed with EasyBuild. So I know there's people using it. But the issue has been that it's been a struggle getting through that documentation to figure out how you go from those 2 ISO files to a targz file. And in that issue, I still have questions that the EasyBuild community has not answered in a month. And I'm not entirely sure how to proceed moving forward. That I've got with both Spack and with EasyBuild is that it's the complex packages that are not really well documented, that are not straightforward. So yeah, if you want to just install multiple versions of R and GCC and easy open source software like that, well, yeah, straight off the bat, you can install all sorts of stuff. And the install docs are fantastically just well done. But I would really like to be able to get to the point where we can tackle some of the harder issues. And going back to that MATLAB aspect, you know, MATLAB, if you are installing MDCS and the compilers, those are two separate installs. Neither Spack nor EasyBuild handles installing twice of the same software on top of each other with a different license key. At least when I was asking the community how to do that for both sides, I was told no. And so, you know, I still have to figure out how to install MATLAB with the license key the first round and then manually go back through and install MATLAB a second time. So it's not nearly as automated as a process as I was really kind of hoping it would be. And so from this new aspect, I still haven't made a decision. I recognize that there are some good pros and cons going both directions. Very much in a, I don't know which direction I'm going to go with yet, because there's some aspects of software that I don't know how to install yet. So yeah, I guess basically what I'm saying is that I think it's great to get started with. I think they're both something that is well worth learning and kind of moving forward. But I'm not entirely sure which direction I'm going yet.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. I think a lot of people on the call can relate to that. We've all been at one place or another where we're. I can remember even back in the old Rocks days, you know, when I first started using Rocks, that many things worked exceptionally well, but some of the more tedious things you tried to do were a bit of a task. So I think at this point, I'm looking back, it seems like we're getting some questions. And I suppose at this point, we should probably open up for questions from the group. We can either read them from the list, or people can actually, Marissa, do you have a preference on how we do that?
Well, why don't we just start with addressing the ones in the chat box, and then after these, folks can start if they want to unmute them. Not everyone likes to unmute themselves, so if you don't like to speak openly about it, just go ahead and add it to the chat box.
Okay, so we had one statement right off that Spack can install OpenFOAM easily, which is a difficult one. I would agree. OpenFOAM's not trivial, and certainly that would be helpful. Dimitri,
so on Jeff, on that one,
yes,
yeah, some of the things that are fairly well documented. I mean, WARF, for example, is a notorious problem one for installing, and that is one of the examples in EasyBuild for how easy it is to use on a complex software. So I guess the point that I was kind of getting at on the difficulty is not necessarily in the difficulty in compiling and writing the recipes, but the software that is just notoriously difficult because you have to do special things, because it requires a special license key, or it has to go talk out to a special license server, or something like Intel where it changes and one version is a completely different way you install it than the version before it. And those are the ones that I have found very difficult under both sides.
Okay. Would Jared or Cormac like to comment on that?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll comment a little bit. So I guess, Chris, that was one of the reasons, some of the points you brought up, that was one of the reasons why right now, in regards to commercial, like most of the difficult software you mentioned were commercial software. It was MATLAB, Intel compilers. And so, those particular software come with installers. And sometimes what I found is I've struggled with some of these issues before. I know we currently install MATLAB through EasyBuild, and maybe initially when we went through that process, probably through trial and error, was sort of like, and some grit, I figured out how to install it. But I've kind of come to the conclusion that the points that you have made, but also even if you figured the process out to install the MATLAB and the Intel compilers, those companies can change the installation process the following year or the next version, and you may have you have to readdress those issues. So I'm kind of leaning towards, for commercial software, since they come with pretty good commercial installation tools, sometimes it's easier just to leverage those and maybe not use Spack or EasyBuild for those installs.
Yeah, I'd have to agree a little bit with Cormac on that, is that, you know, some of these ISVs can have very complicated installers and then they change options all the time or switch it around on you. You know, I guess that's one of the reasons that I really chose Spack, was if you have a package that is dependent on MATLAB that could be in Spack very easily, you can use system packages as part of Spack. So you may be able to, you know, make a virtual type package for MATLAB after you've already done the installation by hand, such that it's MATLAB install. And that's probably the route that I would head down if we had MATLAB at our site. I think, you know, the same thing with other ISVs, although Intel is okay installing with Spack, at least in my cases so far. But yeah, as long as ISVs are willing to change their install methods from year to year, it becomes challenging.
So it looks like we've got, let's see, let me back up so I don't miss anything. Let's see.
I think it's Dimitri. That's
okay. Dimitri's was next. He says, hello, can someone comment on the possibility of Singularity Docker replacing EasyBuild, Spack, et cetera, in the near future as a way of delivering software on HPC?
So again, speaking, I think they're complementary technologies. I don't think Singularity and Docker is going to replace the method of actually building software. I've looked about using Spack to generate software inside Singularity containers, because some of the builds may be so complicated. But that's, you know, I believe they're complementary. And there's some, you know, issues that still have to be worked out with containerization frameworks, with respect to the traditional method of building software on HPC systems. And additionally, some of our users, they don't want to be in containers or anything like that. They've had their workflows mapped out on how to use HPC clusters for quite some time, and they've worked a lot on making sure their performance gains are in when they just build from source. So I don't think it's going to replace, but I think other software as well.
Yeah, this is Cormac. I agree with what Jared has said, all the points he made. You know, I think in regards to complex software, even if you're delivering software through Singularity or some other container technology, you still have to install the software somehow. And in those cases, you know, you can use one of these packages to install the software in your container and then deploy it. So I agree with what Jared is saying, that they're really complementary.
I agree as well. This is Chris. And that I think that a lot of our user base that is really looking for those performance gains are always going to want to tweak their codes, and they're going to want to do their own compiles. Where I see them actually kind of doing a replacing is, you know, most of my TensorFlow users, they're not doing TensorFlow with a compile. They're pulling the latest versions of TensorFlow because it updates so frequently, and they just provide a Docker image. So we do a Docker to Singularity conversion. And so for some applications that at least I'm seeing here, the upstream is providing them in Docker or Singularity images. And so for some codes like that, then yeah, I don't need to worry about trying to build it because the upstream is going to be providing them as that format. So, but the other aspect is anytime you get involved with a proprietary software, that gets really difficult because I know that we are trying to figure out how to put some of our the researchers that are wanting to do the Singularity reproducible science, have everything in their image so that they can publish a paper and reference that one image. How do we deal with that in a licensing standpoint? And so that is a whole different ballpark of questions, but I think lends itself to the fact that it's probably going to be a complementary for at least some software types and certain users for a long time. It won't completely replace.
Right. And then there's some additional workflows that may need to change in the HPC environment to really support Singularity and Docker. I know one thing that I always look about doing is, like, if you want to do MPI IO, I ask many people and they haven't even thought about, that with the containers, or, using GPUs was kind of a headache for a while on many containerization platforms, making sure the drivers got mapped in right and everything like that. And then as well as, what about the people that are on HPC clusters who want to debug their application but not the underlying libraries, with things like Alinea or TotalView, and get that scaling. And I'm just not sure that Singularity and Docker really allow you to do that completely right now.
That brings us to another question. Chris, I believe you touched on this lightly, but Mohammed wants to know, what about the process of installing EasyBuild or Spack? Are there any difficulties of the installation process?
I didn't have any issues really at first. The one thing that I will say that I had issue with was I'm evaluating utilizing the OpenHPC community for the next iteration of my cluster. And so when I first did the Spack and EasyBuilds through the OpenHPC, I ran into some issues because of how OpenHPC maps locations and some values for you, which added a bit of complication and confusion when things didn't work the way I expected them to work. So I ended up using EasyBuild to install EasyBuild, and that was kind of an interesting thing to explore. But I did end up going to my own versions of EasyBuild and Spack in order to really explore it and learn it. And then I went, oh, that's how OpenHPC did it. That's why they did it that way. Okay. So I don't recommend you starting out that way. I recommend you just starting out with the EasyBuild or Spack as you get it from them, as that seemed to align with their documentation right off the bat. So, yeah.
I would say, I guess my experience there, just overall, I would probably, in regards to installing each of those frameworks, I would give maybe the edge to Spack, in the sense it's just really a git clone and then sourcing a file. EasyBuild, as Chris mentioned, there's a couple of different ways of installing it. I personally always install it with pip. But in general, I would probably, I think it's the installation process is more simplistic, from my opinion, in Spack compared to EasyBuild.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Spack is just git clone. You have to source a file. One of the things I like about Spack's installation procedure is it's literally the git clone, and then I can go into working on the configs, where when I bootstrapped from EasyBuild before, there was maybe a couple environment variables that I wanted to set beforehand so that EasyBuild would set up with the right like module naming system or such like that. And so, yeah, Spack is extremely easy to get started with, provided that your system has just Git on it.
One question, are Slack EasyBuild templates usually compatible throughout the different versions of the tools? So in essence, if you have a template for Slack or EasyBuild that's an early version and you upgrade to a newer version of Slack or EasyBuild, do the templates still work, or is there modification required?
Well, from EasyBuild, I've noticed changes. So as it evolves, config files that I've made, old config files that I've had, needed to be updated. So in the case of EasyBuild, I didn't find they were backward compatible. I've found issues.
That's one area that I have on my cons list that's kind of noted to the side of my monitor, because Spack hasn't really reached a 1.0 status. There's nothing that I've noticed that says, okay, this config file for this package requires Spack version at least this. I think it would be relatively straightforward to implement, but there's been nothing like that. So, but I've yet to find where a Spack config file doesn't work when I've been in develop. That it's not just wrong Python, I guess.
Okay. Someone asked, what if we upgrade Spack? Do we have multiple versions in our system? So I guess that's just management of the different versions of Spack and or EasyBuild.
Yeah, like I said, I operate our Spack environment out of the develop, which I don't like doing, but it's been working well for us so far. That's one area where I'll give EasyBuild the edge, is that they have timed releases and things are in place for their release. Spack does have versioned releases, but it's currently moving fast enough where I'd prefer to stay on develop at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
I think, did we skip over Sean, or did you?
Sean dropped off the call.
Oh, okay. All right.
So yeah, I saw that down below. And then somebody also, I think, answered his question down in the chat box.
Thanks.
There is I guess the next one up is for you. For those of you using Spack and EasyBuild, do you encourage your users to take advantage of these tools for building software in their own home directories?
So at our environment, I don't offer Spack as like a module or, a callable routine for the average user. That's a way in our build segment. I use Spack to provide software. I don't encourage people to use Spack, but I'm not going to tell people no that they can't use Spack. And if they were looking at developing a complicated environment where they needed to change dependencies all the time and they didn't want to bother the production team, I would highly encourage them to use Spack and would, work with them to make sure that they're using it right. And then that allows them to also get their code upstream as well. So I would encourage it, but I don't, I guess, provide it as a system software package for them. I would tell them to, clone their own version of Spack and get started.
Okay, so do everything as a user level install.
Yep.
So the same here in INL. We use these package deployment managers just really to provide the software to the users. Don't really advertise it in a way that they can go and do it themselves. So really, and if they want to use those tools, we certainly don't object. But it's just for deploying our software.
Okay.
So Chris here. One of the things that I was actually hoping to solve with the EasyBuild/Spack is that we do have a few users that seem to need custom configurations, and some need it a little bit more frequently than others, and some want to stay on the latest dev, whatever package is updated on the dev branch upstream, they want to pull it down and do their thing. And so I was hoping that I might be able to leverage doing that. However, I have not gotten far enough into my experience to be able to say one way or the other as to how well it works, as I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But at the very worst case scenario, I'm hoping that it's still something that it's easy for me, so that when they say I need this updated, that myself or someone on my team can do it quickly and easily. If I am not able to provide a means for them to do it on their own.
So, Chris, I guess just one thing. I guess when I really got started looking at the EasyBuild and I was going to implement it, and then I came across Spack, in the very early stages, one of the things that EasyBuild was a little bit more focused on, like system administrators and providing that software as a site install. And early on, Spack was very much targeted towards package management for a power user, so that they could, create their own software graph of dependencies and everything that way. So if you have those users that are capable of or doing that, then I'd push them more.
Okay, I will definitely. Yeah, that's another good pro. Thank you.
One other question, and I'm looking at following. This has something to do with modifying module files. The caller says we're starting to exploring space. I suppose space is some type of application. And one question I have is that how much control do we have to modify the module files, as we plan to add module to help message in the module files to help user to run the software. So I guess they want to add a comment or something to the actual module file. I think that shouldn't be a problem, since it's not actually modifying any system parameters or anything, just to display a message.
Right. And it shouldn't be overly complicated. I don't do much outside of I've changed Spack to work a little bit differently. I was a big user of the LMOD's push end routine rather than set end in certain places. And Spack doesn't necessarily have support for that. It's in my tree right now only. But, modifying module files, you can set a number of things via the YAML config files for individual packages, relatively easy. But what I've not done is actually add, the what is messages or extra help beyond what's in the recipe itself. But that, because Spack lets you edit those recipes, you should be able to go in there and template out that piece that you want.
So, okay. Hi, my name is Fan Liu. This is a question from me. And we are Georgia Tech. We are currently just exploring that Spack. So basically, I tried to change the module file, which is generated from Spack. And maybe there's like the recipe, like you just mentioned. We should put all the content in the recipe. So when we install that software, they will generate the module file. Once the module file is generated, we cannot modify it anymore. This assumption is right or not?
So that's a difficult one, because I actually got away from controlling our module files with all the specific help, so I stopped doing that. One area that I put special stuff in is actually in my LMOD configs instead. And so I have a site hook in ours where when certain modules are loaded and they match a table, there's extra help, or certain logging messages or extra stuff. But that's all done with LMOD's site package hook.
Site package hook, you mean?
Yeah, but that's part of LMOD, not,
Oh.
And so modules wasn't initially part of Spack. Spack was intended to have, Spack activate, and Spack was going to control the entire environment itself. But then there was enough requests and whatnot that module support became part of it later. And the module templating is done in some Jinja format and some of the YAML files. And so
Okay.
I guess what I'm saying is I don't ever try to put any of the modules information beyond what's contributed by the built-in packages for Spack yet. But that would be a great question for their Slack channel. How do you do that?
Okay, thank you.
And I guess a couple of things I'd like to add here for everybody that's still sticking around is feel free to continue this conversation on the Champions mailing list. Cormac's not on there, but I think Ben Nickel and I would be happy as things come up to kind of forward things to him, and we can get comments from him. Jared and Chris are on the mailing list, so these are the things that it's obvious that we've got a lot of people interested in these tools, and I think they make really good conversations for the broader community. So if somebody wants to start a general thread on Spack and EasyBuild or individually or something, I think you'll continue to get answers to your questions. Plus, the thing that we've noticed is that the more discussion that's involved among this very large group, the more people have a tendency to go ahead and adopt these technologies. So it's kind of win-win. I hope nobody thinks ever that starting an email on a technical question is a burden or a bad thing, because that's actually why one of the main reasons the Champions mailing list exists. So I would strongly encourage everybody to start discussions of that nature. The second thing I'd like to mention, again, as I indicated when we first started the call, we're trying to ramp up again on these tech calls. I do have one or two other subjects that I plan on covering in the near future, but either A, if you have a subject matter that you would like to see in the near future on a call, or B, if you have a subject matter that you would like to present on, please send Marissa and myself an email. And if we get a lot, we'll put up a poll and we can just let the community decide which ones come when. But we would like to have a depth of subject matter to choose from so we can kind of sustain this tech call. Closing comments from the panel?
I guess that, if anybody goes to supercomputing, both of these packages and their maintainers are usually at the SC series or somebody's involved with them. And they usually have tutorials. Last year, Spack had a full day tutorial, I believe, on how to get started. And they went through the whole 101 guide. And that was really good. I'm sure EasyBuild has had something in the past before, or will have one in the future.
Chris or Cormac?
Yeah, so
I've got no further one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, so just before deciding on each of them, just kick the tires. I feel overall that both packages have pretty good documentation, and some of the tutorials that Jared talked about in Spack, they're available like from SE. They're available on their documentation so you can go through that material, which I feel is really good, and it goes through. There were some questions about customizing the module environment, and it goes through that very nicely. So I would say install both of them. They're pretty easy to install. Look at the actual software that you have and try both packages and see if it installs the particular software that you need, and make a choice on that. And as I've mentioned, I think there's a place for both software packages, just even from a debugging standpoint. They both have recipes. One may work and one may not, and it just helps you troubleshooting.
Sounds great. That's sage advice, Cormac. I guess with no more questions popping up, we're just 15 minutes shy of the time allotment, but I think this has been a call, and this kind of gives me incentive to schedule more of these. I think the turnout and the depth of information has been really good for everybody. And I'd certainly like to thank both our panel for presenting and all of the champions that have showed up for the call. So certainly thank you from me, and we'll be doing more of these in the very near future.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
The recording will be sent out shortly.
Appreciate it, Marissa.
Sure.